Welcome to Nazarene, Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and this is our series on discipleship, Yeshua's kingdom, and us. And this is going to be kind of a different video series. It's a very meaty video series because typically what's happening is we're either addressing areas of concern to the disciples or we're taking questions from the disciples because as they're going through and reading our studies, they're having questions. So they're coming from an advanced level of knowledge. We know we want to put all the material on video eventually, but at this particular point in time, we want to make it teaching for the disciples, but we also want to make it accessible to those who might want to become disciples. So we have an advanced teaching for you this week. So before we begin, we should have included this in last week's teaching, but we didn't think of it until now. But we want to talk about the principles of discipleship for those who might be interested in becoming Nazarene Israel disciples. So one of the very first principles that we use in Nazarene Israel is that we always have to Shema, because that's the first and great commandment. And what that means is that we need to hear and submit to Elohim's voice. So the term Shema doesn't just mean hear, it means hear and obey. And if we don't have that, we don't really have much basis for unity at all. Now, the second principle goes right along with the first. We are to submit first and foremost to Yeshua's spirit because it's of Elohim. And then, so that brings us together as one body, and then we have to submit one to another in his spirit. And what that means is that we all have to look for the place where we can be of the most utility and use and value to Yeshua, our husband and king. So to be a disciple, there is a component of tithing and serving. So there's extremely limited time. When Yeshua was preaching and teaching and living and walking, the 4,000 and the 5,000 came and went, and then you had the myriads and the multitudes, and you had the crowds and the throngs, and he loved them, but he didn't have time to spend a lot of time with them. So he healed them, he taught them, he loved them, but he spent his time with those who were helping him to build his kingdom. He spent his time with those who were giving up their lives or parts of their lives in order to help him build his kingdom. And that's who he spent his time with. So we also want to attempt to become like Yeshua, including we want to figure out his personality. We want to know, why did he respond the way that he did in certain circumstances? What led him? Who is he? If he's going to be our husband and our king, then we at least ought to know who he is. We ought to know his personality. So, and another thing, when we need to know his walk, we even want to go so far as to imitate Yeshua or to attempt to become like him. We think about it. Husband and wife, they're going to become one flesh. They're going to become the same way. They're going to grow together over time in love. So we want to know who he is. He's going to be our husband and king. We might as well at least know who he is. We want to get to know, why does he respond this way in this circumstance? And why does he respond in a completely different way in another circumstance? Not only that, we also want to get to know how he walked, because he who says he believes on him should walk even as he walked. And this speaks to the doctrine. So because the doctrine is so important, we ask that the disciples read all of the studies at least twice and ask any questions they have or any doubts about the study until we all come into doctrinal agreement. And we also do learn things. The studies are living studies. We will change the study if something is wrong. But we ask the disciples please to read all the studies twice first, so that then they can know if it was already answered in the study and they can consider things that way. Now, a lot of people think that that's too much, but the problem is it's not too much. It's what we need to all be doing. We need to study to show ourselves approved in that way so we can come together as one unified ministry worldwide. Because if you're preaching different things from the pulpit, that leads to confusion. And Yeshua says that any house that's divided against itself cannot stand. So Amos 3 and verse 3, Amos famously asks the question, can two walk together unless they be agreed? Well, the answer is clearly not, because even if we start out in the same place, if you think we should go this way and I think we should go that way, we're going to end up going different directions. The house will fall. But even if we start out in different locations, we can come together if we both agree on what the final goals are. So what we want is we want to be in agreement with Elohim. So we're studying his word, and we ask that if anyone sees an error or some better way to interpret it, please let us know, because it's not about us being right. It's about us all learning and discovering together what is right, and then coming together in doctrinal unity over what is right, over his doctrine. That's what we're hoping to do in Nazarene Israel. So in this particular case, we had some questions about our studies on the 3 tithes. So there were some questions. Are the 3 tithes still valid today? And we showed in the last video, in this part 1 of this micro series, that yes, we believe the 3 tithe system is still valid today. And what we showed not is why in the chapter and verse sense, but in that video we showed what the needs are. We showed that there are in fact actual active needs. And so in this part of the video series we'll talk about the chapter and verse. But what we saw in the last video is that there is a definite need, that Yahweh expects us to learn to grow into this role. Because as we saw in our study on Revelation and the end times, the Babylonian system that currently rules the world and which is getting ready to impose a one world order is going to fall at the end of the tribulation time frame. It's going to fall at a time called Trumpet 7. And when it falls, I mean, let's imagine what that looks like. So you've got the entire government structure, the entire government system of the world is going to fall at Trumpet 7, at the end of the tribulation time frame. And that's going to leave a tremendous societal and governmental void. And that day, as fantastic as it sounds, what the scriptures tell us is that Yahweh is going to ask us to set up a just and correct scriptural form of government that takes care of everyone, including the poor, the widows, and the orphans. The thing about the Babylonian system is it's the rule by the elite, for the elite, at the expense of everyone else. It mistreats the poor, the widow, and the orphans, because the goal is for the rich to keep getting richer and the poor to keep getting poorer until they all get bumped off. Well, that's not Yahweh's way. Yahweh wants a system in which everyone is taken care of, including and especially the poor, the widow, and the orphan. And he places special emphasis on this throughout the scriptures, as we'll see at the end of this video presentation. So we already know, we saw in the last chapter, that the government is going to be handed to us, as it says in Daniel chapter 7, starting in verse 26. It says that the heavenly court is going to be seated and shall take away the little horns, or the Pope's dominion, to consume and destroy it forever. Then, as fantastic as it might sound, the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, that's us, the saints of the Most High. That's Nazarene Israel as I understand it. And yet it says, his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So what this means, if we are willing to accept it, is that Yeshua, as we spoke in the last chapter, Yeshua is going to receive a rod of iron from his Father, and then he's going to hand it to us as his body or his bride to do the rule and reigning for him, with him as our head in the heavens and us as his hands and his feet, as his body, as his bride, being one flesh with him, walking out the will of heaven during the millennium time frame. So that's our understanding. We also believe that this was the understanding of the apostles in the first century. In Acts, or Maaseh, chapter 15, starting in verse 15, the apostle Yaakov, or James, is speaking, and he tells us that everything that he sees that's being set up, the tabernacle of David, which represents global spiritual government, it's being established just as it's written. He says, quoting Amos 9 and verse 11, he says, "And after this I will return and rebuild the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down." That's a global spiritual government. We'll talk about that in another place. He says, "I will rebuild its ruins, and I will set it up." He says, "so that the rest of mankind," speaking of Ephraim, "may seek Yahweh, even all the repentant, returning Gentile Ephraimites who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who does all these things. Now we know that they were starting this in the first century. And we know that things went way off course in the great falling away. We also know that the great falling away is nearing its end. We talk about that in the Nazarene Israel study. So please join us for this advanced discipleship level study on the third tithe for the poor, why it's still important, and why we should all participate in it in order to please our husband and king. Stay with us. If you're really interested in these topics and you want to know why does Yahweh order and structure society as he does, why does he order and structure the priesthood as he does, or if you have historical questions, why did this apply in this era and not in that epoch, these kinds of things, I can recommend for you the Torah Government Study. I will cover all these materials. It'll give a background so that these things basically all make sense. So one of the things that we explain in Torah Government, of course the disciples are already reading it twice, but in Torah Government we explain that there are two different kinds of governments in Israel. One is temporal, meaning it pertains to this world, and the other one is spiritual, meaning the priesthood. And as we see in that study, the two different kinds of governments can levy two different kinds of kingdom taxes. And the reason they levy kingdom taxes is that Yahweh has a job for them to do for him. Yahweh likes things ordered and regulated, not in a negative way, as in a Babylonian government, but in a positive way, as in an Israelite, a set-apart government. So in other words, these two governments have something to do for Yahweh, and obviously they need funds with which to do that. So the temporal government, or what's called the kingship, the government everyone thinks of, they're allowed to levy up to a 10% tax, and that's according to 1 Samuel 8. That was what was prophesied. Then you also have a spiritual government, or the priesthood, and these are supposed to be funded by the three tithes, which are effectively three different sets of kingdom taxes, which go for three different purposes. So if you want to know how these things apply in the Levitical order, I'll refer you to the Torah Government Study. But here we're going to talk about the application of the three tithes in the Melchizedekian order. So if you want to know about the Levitical order, please check out the Torah Government Study. You can read it for free on the website. You can download a PDF copy for free. You can also purchase a paperback copy at our cost from Amazon.com. And if anyone wants to translate into another language, we would love that. May Yahweh bless you for that. Because we're all supposed to be trying to figure out how can we help grow Yeshua's kingdom. That's the purpose here. So the tithes in the Melchizedekian order. How can we together grow Yeshua's kingdom? Well, okay, so the first tithe, that goes to support Yeshua's ministers. And basically, we're talking the congregational elders, congregational deacons, and then you have the apostles, or what's called in Hebrew the shaliachim, and they serve as the priests in Yeshua's Melchizedekian order. We show that in Torah Government. And they have a job to do. They are supposed to build and unify. So the deacons and elders are supposed to build congregations and evangelize their area. And then the priesthood has basically the prophetic and apostolic job of unifying all the congregations together. And that way it becomes one unified spiritual kingdom, which is what Yeshua says he wants. We explain that in many places in our studies. So the first tithe is annual. We'll talk about that in some other place and time. So the second tithe is also an annual tithe. It needs to be paid every year. And it's also, it comes from Yahweh. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, under the Levitical order, if you live inside the land of Israel, Jerusalem is mandatory. But it's not far. The state of Israel is about the same size as the state of New Jersey. So you don't have to go far, but you do have to go. So the second tithe pays for going to go up to Jerusalem if we live in the land. If we don't live in the land, there is not a requirement to go up to Jerusalem for the feast. You can, but you don't have to. But the point is to make the feasts a joy for the whole family, so that the children are going to want to grow up teaching the feasts to their children, and so Israel then perpetuates itself. So you get the concept of making the feasts a joy for the whole family, and especially for the children. So the second tithe, again, is a 10% annual tithe. The Christians follow this concept because they have, I think, something like 25% of all consumer spending takes place during the Christmas shopping season. Well, that's the thing. They're trying to make Christmas a delight. Well, it's the right concept, just with the wrong application. So we take that concept of making the feasts a delight, and now we need to apply them in a correct doctrinal way. We need to apply them to Yahweh's feasts and not to Satan's converted feasts. So, but the concept of feast gifts is a very good one. So if you need a new phone, you need a new computer, if you're rich, you need a new car, if you have these kinds of things, this is a good time to purchase those things. So that way there's an association with the children. Hey, the feast, that's a time of celebration. That's a time of joy. New clothing. The feasts are a great time for new clothing. So anyway, whatever your heart desires with that 10%, we'll talk about that more. If you don't need to spend 10% on yourself, you can also give gifts to the poor. Now here we come to the third tithe, and we're going to talk in a little bit of detail here about the third tithe. If you want all the detail, please read the Torah Government Study, particularly the chapter on how Yahweh helps and supports his poor. So then that way you'll have the same background information as the disciples who are asking these questions. So the third tithe is given 2 years in 7. And the goal of the third tithe is to take care of or support the poor, the widow, and the orphan in Israel. And this is a subject which is extremely important to Yahweh's heart. It's very easy to overlook it because most of us despise those who are poor. We tend to look down on them. We tend to think poorly of the poor. We tend to think badly of the poor. Yahweh doesn't think badly of the poor. Yahweh expects us to support and take care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. And it's extremely important to him. That's one of the reasons the punishments are coming upon Babylon, is they took advantage of the poor and the widow and the orphan. So he wants us to support the poor and the widow and the orphan. And there's various theories that that's how you can judge nations, is how they take care of their disadvantaged. So Yahweh wants us to take excellent care. He wants us to take set apart care of our disadvantage. Obviously, that takes funds. Well, let's talk about the three tithes individually just a little bit, just briefly to review. The disciples will already know this information, but just as a brief review for those who might be interested to become disciples. The first tithe is the first 10% of our income. A lot of people leave it for the last, and then they don't know where to get the money to tithe. Where you get the money to tithe is you sit down, you pray, you count the cost, and you say, you know what, this matters to me. You take the first 10% of your income as a sacrifice unto Yahweh. That's how you can make 10% of your income. People are always like, how can you possibly do 10%? Put it first. Put Yahweh first. Don't leave Yahweh till last. Don't leave him till last. He doesn't like it. Don't just give him an offering like Cain. Give him your first and finest like Hevel. So we give him the first 10% of our income, and that is to basically, if you're not part of the priesthood, what that is an acknowledgement that yes, Yahweh does establish these institutions. Yes, Yahweh does have a goal and a mission and a job for these institutions to perform. And yes, I need to be not rebellious. I need to be a good disciple. I need to be a good, faithful person and pay my tithes so that I'm not robbing Elohim, so that his ministers have the funds that they need to work with to do the job. So no one likes taxes, but it's kind of like a kingdom tax. And if you want your king to be happy with you, then we all need to pay our taxes. So, but the thing is when we read scripture, what we see is Yahweh talking about us wanting to give him gifts and offerings and first fruits in addition to our tithes. And the thing is, most people have such a hard heart against the tithe, I think perhaps because they don't really understand what it's for. Because Yahweh has always wanted a kingdom for his son. Now the operation has gone through various stages. Again, all of this is explained in the Torah government study. If you read the Torah government study, then you can understand the big arc that Yahweh is making with all these things, and you can understand why he ordered the 3 tithe structure the way he did. Why is the Melchizedekian order ordered the way that it is? Now, even though it fell away into the great falling away, now we're coming back. Now our job is to truly reestablish the tabernacle of David as our forerunners were attempting to do in the first century. And brothers and sisters, I believe the time is now. I believe the time is that we're supposed to be doing it, because we're taking a look. It's happening inside Nazarene Israel. Yahweh is sending disciples to Nazarene Israel, and we are working at taking the true good news into all nations. There's a big job to do, and funds are never in excess. So, there is a requirement to anyone who loves Yeshua to help his work go forth. And I believe, my personal feeling is that what Yahweh wants, of course, is a bride for his son. Well, but what kind of bride? He doesn't just want any bride. He wants a Proverbs 31 bride who loves his son Yeshua so much that that's all she wants in life, is she wants to see his kingdom established. She values him more than she values anything of the world, including her 10% or her gifts or her offerings or her first fruit offerings. She doesn't value those things. She values him. She loves him. She wants to see his kingdom established. And that's worth it to her. She has to give up some money. She's not doing anything else anyway. That's because that's her whole life. Her whole life is, how can I help my husband get what he wants? I love my husband. How can I help my husband get his kingdom established? That's what Yahweh is looking for in a disciple. So that's the kind of people we want to be. Okay, historically, under the Levitical order, we'll just cover a verse. So Bamidbar, or Numbers, chapter 18, starting in verse 20, Yahweh said to Aharon, you will have no inheritance in their land. Okay, the tribes can have an inheritance. The priesthood may not have an inheritance. Nor will you have any portion among them. The tribes, yeah, they can, great, as well as they can do. Great, praise Yahweh. The priests, nuh-uh, they will not have a portion. Because he says, I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel. I want you to focus on me. I'm a jealous Elohim. I want all your attention. I want all of your service. Behold, I'm going to give the children of Levi all the tithes in Israel as an inheritance, because I want them to have the money they need to perform the work they're doing for me, building my son's kingdom in the tabernacle of meeting. It's an early phase, so we don't see Yeshua show up until the first century, but nonetheless, the children of Levi were laying groundwork for the coming kingdom of Yeshua. So that's what we're really doing, is we're sowing into Yeshua's kingdom. That's really what we're doing. We're helping to build Yeshua's kingdom. But it has to be a unified kingdom. It has to follow his rules. And 99.999% of the other, I haven't seen any other ministries that are even attempting to follow all the rules of the renewed covenant. My understanding, Nazarene Israel were the only ministry I have even seen that is attempting to follow all the rules exactly as they're written. So we are attempting to build Yeshua's kingdom. But as the Apostle Shaul says in 2 Corinthians, Corinthine Bet, he's speaking to the right heart here. Because it was very possible to tithe under the Levitical order out of necessity or out of fear, but not from a heart of love. And here Yahweh's turning the tables. Here Yahweh is saying, you know what? It's not a mandatory. We're not going to kill you in the Melchizedekian order. We're not going to stone you to death if you don't pay your tithes. That's not it. Under the Levitical order, yes, you would get stoned. Under the Melchizedekian order, we're not going to stone you, but we can't afford to spend time with you if you're not one of the 12 helping. If you're not dedicated to Elohim, then the harvest is enormous and the workers are extremely few. But he says, but this I say, he who sows, if we have faith if we truly believe that Elohim exists and he's here and he's doing his word and his word is real, the Apostle Shaul says, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. We're talking in spiritual terms. You might have more money to invest in the material world, so you might have more material wealth. But what does it gain a man to gain the whole world if he loses his soul or displeases his Elohim? What is it worth? Where is our treasure? What do we care about? Are we trying to please Elohim? Are we trying to live our lives in the world under the disguise of serving Elohim? He says, he who sows sparingly, like most of the Messianic movement, will also reap sparingly. But he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. He says, so let each one give as he purposes in his heart. Do we love Yeshua? Do we want to see him get his kingdom built? Not grudgingly or of necessity, because that was under the Levitical order. He says, but Elohim loves a cheerful giver. He loves the Proverbs 31 bride who can't wait to help build Yeshua's kingdom. That's what he wants to see. He says, and Elohim is able, if we truly believe that Elohim is who he says he is, and that he truly has the power to save from the dead, we ought to be able to see that Elohim is also able to make all favor abound toward us, that we, always having sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. If we put our focus in the right place, and he is our treasure, and he is what we want, there's always an abundance. There's always all sufficiency in all things if we have our focus the right way. So this is why the Apostle Shaul asks, he's talking about a first tithe concern. He says, if we have sown the spiritual things for you, should it be such a hard, great thing with you if we receive or reap or take some of your material things? Because we're doing a job here, and it's definitely a full-time job. I don't know if I'd have to look, but 85, 90-hour weeks, just going from the time you wake up to the time your head hits the pillow. If you're doing the job right, you're going to be busy. So, and this is what it takes. This is what is needed. The harvest is enormous. The workers are doing the best that they know how. They're doing the best that they can. Is it such a hard thing if we need some financial support? So he's talking about a first tithe concern here. Now we're going to talk about first and third tithe concerns, or Yeshua is, in Matityahu, or Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19. Yeshua says, Yeshua talks more about money than he talks about love. And maybe that's because he sees giving to his Father's kingdom is the fruit of a correct spirit. It's the fruit of love for him. Because if we love him, we'll be doing things for him. If we love him, we'll be doing all we can to set up and establish his coming kingdom. It's here, but it's going to be even more here after the tribulation and Armageddon. So what does Yeshua say? He says, he's talking about both first and third tithe concerns. He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures here on earth, material treasures, gold, silver, money, IRAs, big house, nice car, a lot of finery, paintings on the wall, whatever you got, vacation plans, IRA, what you got. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, or can break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, spiritual riches, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves can't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You can tell how a person loves Yeshua. Take a look at their calendar and take a look at their checkbook. What do they spend their time and what do they spend their money on? That'll tell you. One of the things about the tithe, yes, you're giving away 10% or more. But the thing is, you begin to lose the lusts for the desires and the things and treasures of this world. So you learn how to become blessed with the spiritual riches. It's a great blessing. Well, we talk about focusing on the real things. We talk about focusing on the right things. Yeshua tells us in Luke or Luca chapter 14 and verse 33, he says, so likewise, Whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. So, I take room and board, and I'm happy. I have food, I have clothing, I am satisfied. I have equipment to work for him. I'm helping to establish his kingdom. That's all I want. That's all I need. But we need help doing it because there's more work presently than there are workers. So we need the help, but I don't spend it on me. That's the difference. I'm spending it on Yeshua and his kingdom. So it's because Yeshua says he wants his priests to forsake the world. So we're renouncing the world, so to speak, and basically donating the rest of our lives, working as hard as we can to help him build his unified kingdom worldwide. And he works his servants hard, but he always gives you enough and an abundance in all things. So you have enough and plus to make it nice. I don't know what more a person wants. Now we take a look at how the structure was beginning to set up in the early parts of the book of Acts. We begin to see both first and third tithe ministries. So here we have in Maaseh, or Acts chapter 4, starting in verse 34, it tells us, "Nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of, I believe, extra lands or extra houses, sold them, and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold and laid them at the apostles' feet. And they distributed to each as anyone had need." I believe those were extra lands or extra houses because, you have to live somewhere. But the point is that they had a big job of financing the kingdom to do in the first century. They were attempting to stand the tabernacle of David back up because it serves as a global spiritual government. Then everything went off course into the great falling away, and now it's been coming back from the great falling away ever since the Protestant Reformation in 1517. So the timing is now, and he is beginning to call people to the work. But the people he calls to the work are the people that say, what can I bring? How can I help serve my husband? How can I bring my A game? What can I bring to the fight, so to speak? That's who the disciples are. How can I do? And we begin with tithing and serving. That's one of the principles that we have in Nazarene Israel. To be a disciple, we need to be tithing and we need to be serving. Somehow we need to be, or helping the kingdom go forth in some fashion. So here, I believe we see the disciples taking a look and say, I don't need this, I don't need that, we can sell this, we can sell that, because we're going to be dispersed out of Jerusalem in 70 CE anyway. So let's get rid of the stuff we don't need. Let's start downsizing now. And put your treasure in the kingdom. Give your riches for the spiritual riches. So it's a very real thing. It just depends on if people have faith. It depends on if people actually believe. You have to believe to give your money away to Yeshua's cause. You have to believe. It's a tangible, and perhaps that's one reason why Yeshua talks more about money than he does about love, is because it's a tangible indicator of where our heart is. Because where our heart is, that's where we put our treasure also. So we continue to see the structure be set up. We have a continuing, now we have a Melchizedekian manifestation of the 3 tithes. So they're taking care of whoever has need. That's the third tithe consideration. But we also know that the 12 were set apart as, basically it was the original priest, the original Melchizedekian priesthood. So it says in Maaseh, or Acts, chapter 6, starting in verse 1, it says, "Now in those days when the number of disciples was multiplying." So when you're small, you don't necessarily need differentiation, but like a body, as the body grows, you start to need cell division. You start to need organ differentiation. Any body is that way. The body starts to get big, you need to have organization. You need to have bodily organs. So now in those days when the number of disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews, that would be the more devout, more Jewish believers who are paying more attention to the commandments, they're paying more attention to Yeshua's personality, they're paying more attention to Yeshua's walk, they're trying to imitate Yeshua and walk exactly as he walked. But there was a complaint against those more devout Hebrews by the Hellenists, or the Greeks. Basically it's more like a Reform Jew today. So you have the Orthodox who are very devout, and then you have Reform Jews, not so much. They feel free to take on non-Hebrew ways. But still, they would minister to them in the first century. So now in those days, when the number of disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the devout Hebrews by the less devout Reform Jew type Hellenists, because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. Now that's a third tithe concern. The poor, the widow, and the orphan. So what are you going to do? When you have to take care of the widows, that's near and dear to Yahweh's heart. You've got a whole tithe for the poor, the widow, and the orphan. Now they're not getting the daily distribution. So what are you going to do? You have to fix that. So then, but you can't take time away from the first tithe ministry, because now you're starting to grow. Now you need the organ differentiation. You need first tithe ministers to handle first tithe matters. You need third tithe ministers to handle third tithe matters. And then the people, they're in charge of the second tithe. But what are you going to do? So the 12 summoned the multitude of disciples and said, it's really, we have a big job to do, and Elohim expects us to do it. So it's really not good. It's not desirable that we should leave the first tithe work of Elohim, the ministry and prayer, and serve tables, which is a third tithe concern. It says, therefore, we need more help. We've got to have more workers. So therefore, brethren, seek out from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the set-apart spirit and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. So they're going to establish an official third tithe ministry. Well, obviously you have to have some kind of funding for that, to be realistic. He says, but we will continue to give ourselves continually to the first tithe ministry of prayer and to the ministry of the word. So those are first tithe matters. So now we have organ differentiation. We have cell division going on as the body is growing. Well, the people are in charge of their own second tithe. Now the thing to bear in mind is the second tithe belongs to Yahweh. It doesn't belong to us. And if we're disciples, we'll be glad to pay second tithe, just like we're glad to pay the first and the third. So now in the land of Israel, again, details, please see the Torah government study, but in the land of Israel, we use the second tithe to bring our families up to Jerusalem, because that's where Yahweh has chosen to place his name. Now, we're not in the land of Israel, so that doesn't apply to us. So outside the land, we use it if sometimes there's a need to travel to get to brethren of like mind, but at least you have the funding to travel. And the purpose is to get together with other families so that your children can meet other children in the faith, so they can make friends in the faith, with feast gifts, making the feast a delight for our families so they want to grow up around others of the faith. If you have children and you're concerned that they're going to grow up in the faith, then you need to get busy. You need to get active. And that's one of the things second tithe is all about. So we want to do whatever it takes so that our children are going to grow up with fond memories of the feasts, and they're going to want their children to grow up with, there's a nice typo there, and they want heirloom children. Yes, they want their children to inherit the same love for Yeshua. So, and the other thing is, we need to remember that it's Yahweh's tithe. It's not our tithe. It's only up to us to administer it within the family. So I've met rich people. He's just like, I'm not going to spend 10% on myself, because he made a lot of money. And it's like, well, if you don't need to spend it on you, there's a lot of families that could really use some help. And if we're truly the Assembly of Philadelphia that's protected through the end times, that we need to care about these other families as if they were our own children, or as if they were our own family. Because if you're not willing to put your money where your mouth is, then your love isn't for real. And that's hypocrisy. And that's the one thing we don't want to be, is hypocrites. So if you love Yeshua, if you love Elohim, if you value the inheritance you've been given, you don't need the whole 10% for yourself. You can give it to a poor family in the faith. We will be happy to pass it along for you. Or if you prefer, you can also donate it to the kingdom work. Because again, the harvest is great, and the workers are few, and the help is never in excess. But that's the second tithe. That's administered ourselves. So again, it needs to come off the top. But again, that's also where they have 25% of all spending, all consumer spending takes place around Christmas. Yahweh's just asking for 10% to take place around the feasts. As long as you're paying first tithe and second tithe, why not third tithe? Now this is where we start to get into the information where the original question and the original reason for this micro-series came from. Okay, now in the Torah government study, we explain that in the 3rd and the 6th years of the 7-year, what's called a Shemitah cycle, we're supposed to give a third 10% tithe. And that's for the poor, the widow, and the orphan, because Yahweh cares about that. And the thing is, we are supposed to be a family, we're a nation, we're a religious body, we're his body, we're his bride, we're all of those things all at the same time. We're a temple, we're a living tabernacle made with people. We have to take care of each other. The promise in Revelation is that the assembly of Philadelphia, true brotherly love, those are the only ones that are protected in the end times. And the point is, there's rules to love. If you're not willing to take care of your neighbor, if you don't see yourself as your brother's keeper, at least not inside of Nazarene Israel, then is your heart the same as Yeshua's? And if your heart's not the same as Yeshua's, do you have Yeshua's spirit? Because if you have the same spirit, shouldn't we have the same love as he does? Shouldn't we have the same behavior? So Yeshua gave all. Now, we're not asked to give all unless we're joining the priesthood. If you're going to join the priesthood, you need to give all. If you're not going to give all, then we're to give at least 10%. And twice every year, first tithe and second tithe, and then 3 times in the year of tithing, every 3rd year, twice in the 7-year Shemitah cycle. So as it says in Deuteronomy, or Devarim, chapter 26 and verse 12, he says, when you have finished laying aside all, and just it translates differently, when you have finished laying aside all of the tithe, or tithes rather, of your increase in the 3rd year, which Yahweh calls the year of tithing, and because that's how much emphasis he places on taking care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. In the years we're really taking care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan, that's the year of tithing. So he says, when you have finished laying aside all of the tithes of your increase in the 3rd year, the 3rd year of tithing, and have given it to the Levite, the stranger, so first tithe to the Levite, and then 3rd tithe to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, so they may eat within your gates and be filled. And we talk about this in the Torah government study. It's actually the priesthood who ministers that. The people don't go around handing it out. It's given to the priesthood, and then the priesthood ministers that to the faithful within the body. Continuing in verse 13. Then you shall say before Yahweh your Elohim, I have removed the set-apart tithes from my house, and I have also given them to the Levite, first tithe, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all your commandments which you have commanded me. And I have not transgressed your commandments, nor have I forgotten them. And we see several places where there's a need not just for first tithe, but also for the 3rd tithe. Continuing in verse 14, saying, I have not eaten any of it when in mourning, nor have I removed any of it for an unclean use, nor given any of it for the dead. But I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh my Elohim, and have done according to all that you have commanded me. And because of that, Father, because of that, my King, now please, because I have obeyed you in everything, and I have done all that you have commanded me, please, please, please look down from your set-apart habitation from heaven, and bless your people Israel, and the land which you have given us, just as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. And the point is, we're able to ask this because we have obeyed his voice, because we have done according to all that he has commanded us. That's why we're able to ask these things. So we need to obey him in this. And we see, again, that there was a need for this in the 1st century, and we see this 3 tithe system being set up in Melchizedekian fashion in the early chapters of Acts. Again, we talk about this in the Torah government study. But it says, now, in those days, when the number of disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. Now, clearly, if there's a daily distribution, there's a collection. What is that collection? That collection is the third tithe. That's what it's all about. Plus gifts, plus offerings, plus first fruit offerings, so that we can take care of Yeshua's people, Nazarene Israel. So the need existed in the first century before things went off track, and now we're told to bring things back on track because the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven is going to be dropped into our laps at the end of the tribulation time frame. It's going to be up to us to minister justice and righteousness in his name with Yeshua's rod of iron, which he himself received from his Father and then now will hand to us. So I don't know about you, but when I take a look around, I think we have a long way to go before we are ready and capable and able to administer world government. And I believe the commandment is to begin getting ready now for those who have ears to hear. So obviously there's a need for collection if there's going to be a distribution. And then the 12 summoned the multitude and said, we have a job to do. We need to stay on the first tithe of work. Like I myself, I'm running 85, 90 hours a week. Basically, when I wake up to the time my head hits the mattress, I'm going. And so there's a lot of work to do. So if you're going to have me serve table, that's important work, has to be done. But if you're going to have me serve tables, I don't have time for all this. So the ministry of the word will be neglected, and that's not going to work. We have to perform the ministry of the word. So what are we going to do? Well, okay, brethren, here's what we do. We're going to seek out from among yourselves 7 men of good reputation, full of the set-apart spirit and wisdom, so that we can appoint over the third tithe the resources. Whatever collections come in, whatever third tithe resources come in, you're in charge of it. You're in charge of taking care of the people. That's the first century. Obviously, in the dispersion, we have different financial mechanisms and these kinds of things. And it says, but nonetheless, the apostles, the priesthood, would continue to give themselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word. And there's a lot of people that just really don't understand just how important that prayer and the ministry of the word is. If we don't have the ministry of the word, then how do we have the doctrine to come together in unity? How do we know what his belief is so we can come together in unity with him? How do we preach it? How do we teach it? How does the word go forth? It's a big job. There's a lot more work in ministry than you would think. That's for sure. Okay, so now we said that the third tithe is given twice in a 7-year period of time. So it's given in the 3rd year, and then it's also given in the 6th year of the 7-year cycle, what's called the Shemitah cycle. So now here Yahweh gives the commandment in Vayikra or Leviticus chapter 25, starting in verse 3. And he says, 6 years you shall sow your field when you're living in the land of Israel, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath unto Yahweh. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. So just like we're going to count to 6 and then rest on the 7th-day Sabbath, we're going to count to 6 in sowing and harvesting our crops, and then we're going to let the land rest on a 7th-year Sabbath called the Shemitah. Now we're also going to see that 7 Shemitahs plus 1 equal what's called a Yovel, or a Jubilee. So just like you have the count to 7, so you have in the Pentecost count, for Pentecost you count to 7 times, and then add 1, and then that's your Shavuot, or Pentecost. In just the same way, we also have a count for the Jubilee. So Yahweh gives us this Jubilee count in Vayikra, or Leviticus, chapter 25, starting in verse 8. And he says, and you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Yovel, or the Jubilee, to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. On Yom Kippur, meaning the Day of Atonement, you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land, and that begins the 50th year. That begins the year of the Jubilee. So there's a relationship between the Shemitah and the Jubilee cycles. If you don't get what you need on that in Torah government, there's also the Torah calendar study. We have a separate chapter on that. So what we're saying here is that the third tithe is going to be given twice in this 7-year time frame. It's going to be given in the 3rd year, and it's going to be given again in the 6th year. So now the specific question that the disciples asked, they asked, does the third tithe still apply today? And how do we work that with the land rest or the Shemitah? I mean, how does that work out? So what are we supposed to do here? When being as they are disciples, they want to know because they want to do it, because they want to be imitators of Yeshua, because that's their understanding. So their other question is it possible to prorate the third tithe? Because for many of them, it would be very difficult. So they know they have to give a first tithe, and we all have to give a second tithe. I mean, that's only in our best interest. And, to give a little more in a third tithe, that's something people can schedule in every month. But if they have to take a whole third tithe 2 times in 7 years, that seems to represent a lot. So there's different feelings on this, but basically our answer is, if you pray and Yahweh leads you to give your third tithe in a pro rata, we are happy to receive it that way. We are not here to enforce that anyone does anything. We are here to, basically, we're a bridal service. If anyone wants to be Yeshua's bride, then we are here to help orchestrate the efforts to help Yeshua get what he wants, which is an organized body and an organized bride that works together to build him a literal spiritual kingdom that will rule and reign instead of the current Babylonian government we have now, because that's going to fall at trumpet 7. And in that day, it will be so important for us to have a system for taking care of our poor, our widows, and our orphans. And this is it. It's right here. This is what Yahweh commands right here. So now there is an argument for only a first tithe. And if you believe that way, then we will try to help you and serve your needs. But I've been studying this for a lot of years, and Yahweh recently showed me that no, it's the 3 tithe system. Because taking care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan, that's what he calls the year of tithing. So if you don't tithe the 3 tithes that year, it's as if you didn't tithe. Because that's one of the markers of a righteous society, is that they take care of their disadvantaged. They take care of their poor, their widows, and their orphans. So yes, if you feel that, we're not under the Levitical order, we're under the Melchizedekian order right now. So if you feel that that's the way you want to pay your 3 tithes, as a pro rata, we are happy to assist you with that, and we will do what we can. It's just like in the Levitical system, you have 3 tithes paid annually, and then in the Melchizedekian system, Shaul recommends setting something aside weekly. So it's a different schedule, but it's the same principle. It's the same precepts of taking care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. And people say, well, how can we know how much? Well, it says right here, this is what Yahweh says. So here we do the math. So we have the 3rd and the 6th years of the 7-year Shemitah were third tithe years. That's 2 years and 7. So we take 2 divided by 7. That's 0.2858. So let's be safe. Let's round that up to 0.29. Round that up to 0.30 if you want, but 0.29 is probably good enough. So let's just be safe. Let's round that up to 0.29 of an extra tithe each year. So if you pray and Yahweh tells you that this will be pleasing to him, which I can't imagine why it wouldn't be, you can tithe 12.9% to Nazarene Israel and 10% to yourself for your second tithe. That's a total of 22.9%, or you could make it 23% if you prefer. But that will cover, if you feel led to do things in a pro rata basis, That's a way you can pay your 3 tithes, because you're already paying 10% for the priesthood. This is an additional 2.29%, and you're already paying yourself for second tithe anyway, or you should be. We all should be paying second tithe so that we can make the feast a delight for ourselves and our families and our children, so that children will want to grow up in the way that they should go, so that when they are older, they shall not depart from it. And you can give it to any purpose that the ministry can serve Yeshua with. You can give it to any purpose like that. So again, this is Yahweh's tithe, is the second tithe. We can give it in a third tithe way. There's nothing wrong with that. So, but what Yahweh wants to see is that we love him, and because he cares about his people, the poor, that we also care about his people who are poor. So, and that's, I believe, why Yeshua speaks about love less than he speaks about money, is because money is, anyone can say, oh sure, I love the poor, but when was the last time they actually helped one advance in the faith? When was the last time they say, well, I love Yeshua, I love Yahweh. Okay, great. Do you put your money where your mouth is? What are you doing to help further and advance his kingdom? Is the love of his people who are poor, is it important to you? How is it important to you? How do we know? How does Yahweh know? There's a lot of people who think they're going to walk arm in arm with the apostle Shaul just because they read some of his epistles. But the judgment's not going to be like that. The judgment's going to be like, are we doing everything that he says to do, or are we not doing everything that he says to do? That's the difference between sheep and goats. So I just want to give an anecdotal support for this. Now, this was several years ago. I can't remember exactly what year we did this, but sometime around 2010, something like that. So we took a visit to Azure Standard Farms in Oregon, and I can't remember his name, but they are an organic and natural farm. You can have them, they deliver bags of organic grains and things at a big discount. I'm not related with them in any sense, but just to share the story, they said that when they began to let the land rest, they experienced a 51% general increase in their harvest. And I spoke with the grandfather and said, why? And he said, well, we believe it has something to do with disrupting the bacteria cycle in the soil. And maybe it makes more of the nutrients and minerals available to the plants as opposed to the bacteria. But he said there's a 51% general increase in the harvest. I just thought I'd pass that praise report along. But first and third tithe matters are important to Yahweh. So Yeshua says in Matthew chapter 23 and verse 23, notice what he says. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. He says, for you pay the tithes of mint and anise and cumin. So they're paying their tithes. He says, but you've neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, the justice, the mercy, and the faith. And he says, these you ought to have done. You ought to have paid your tithes of mint and anise and cumin and barley and all your crops, without leaving the justice and the mercy and the faith undone. So you're doing it, but you're not doing it right. That's what he's saying. And the problem is that a lot of what the church believes is that if I'm doing it right, I don't actually need to do it. And that's a big sham. So, but notice what Yeshua says here in the Beatitudes, his very opening sermon in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 20. And in the context, he says, for I say to you that unless your righteousness, and in context, he's talking about obedience to his Father Yahweh's commands. That's what it means in Hebrew, idiom. Righteousness means a commandment keeper. So they'll say, tzaddik, tzaddik. They say, righteous man, righteous man. And you're like, who, me? And it's like, you're keeping the commandments. So that to them is a righteous man. And he's saying, for I say to you that unless your righteousness, unless your obedience to the commandments exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. So in other words, here we have the scribes and the Pharisees paying their tithes of mint and anise and cumin, but they're doing so in a hypocritical fashion. They've got a checklist mentality. Check. And once they've paid their tithes, now they don't have to have mercy and compassion and justice and faith. But they can make up their own Torah. They can make up their own variation of his father's Torah. They can make up all kinds of fence laws and things that effectively negate his father's Torah. They can void the Torah out because they don't have the right hearts. And so here, I believe a similar warning is due to us. Because how many of us, we don't pay tithes? We don't care. What, build Yeshua a kingdom? What's that about Amina? You know, brothers, we need to understand Yahweh wants a kingdom for his son. He wants a queen for his son. But not just any kind of a queen. He wants a Proverbs 31 bride who loves him and is trying to help him get what he wants out of love. So that's her motivation. That's what makes her run. That's what makes her tick. And how many of us are like, no, it's my money. We don't need to build a kingdom with it. We don't need those poor people. You know, all those, you know, and, you know, I take room and board and I have equipment to serve Elohim with. So there's a lot of people, I think, you know, when we have the scribes and the Pharisees tithing, and our Torah obedience needs to exceed theirs, or we're not even going to enter, or by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Do we believe what Yeshua says? Do we take it to heart? Or do we not really have faith? Do we not really believe what it says? Do we not really shema, which is hear and obey? Because we're hearing him, we read what he writes, what he says, it's written right there, anyone can understand it. Are we doing it? Are we keeping it? Are we obeying the commandments out of love? That's the question. And this again, how does a society treat its poor? Deuteronomy or Devarim 15 and verse 11, Elohim tells us, for the poor will never cease from the land. You will always have poor to help. You will always have poor widows and orphans. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor and your needy in your land. Okay, we're not in the land. Same precept, same concept. He wants us to take care of his people. Tehillim or Psalms 41 and verse 1. It says, blessed is he. David, remember, they believe that David was prophesying and speaking by the Spirit in the Psalms. So this is the Spirit speaking. She says, blessed is he who considers the poor. Yahweh will deliver him in times of trouble. Well, there's going to be plenty of times of trouble coming ahead, so are we considering the poor? Mishlei or Proverbs 21 and verse 13 tells us that whoever shuts his ears to the cries of the poor will also cry himself and not be heard. That's how seriously Yahweh takes the cries of the poor, these despised people. Mishlei or Proverbs 22 and verse 9 says that he who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. That's the opposite of an evil eye, is to have a good eye or a generous eye. Someone who wants to give. It indicates that the spirit within them is light and not in darkness. What a great promise. Those of us with light in our eyes who give generously to the poor, we will be blessed and will be safeguarded in the end times. What a wonderful blessing. Don't we want that? Do we truly believe? This has been our study on the third tithe for the poor at the discipleship level. And if anyone wants to be a disciple, then we need to read the words of Elohim and do everything what they say, so that we might help build and further and establish his kingdom here on this earth. And if that's your goal, and if that's your desire, then welcome home to Nazarene Israel, the original faith of the apostles. Shalom.